If you ask us, it's never not the season for spooks and creep-em-ups, and that's why there's no time like the present to give you our list of the best horror games you can play on PC right now. From old classics to fresh new favourites, we've got everything that the discerning player in search of a scare could possibly be looking for. Whether you like gore, survival horror, text-based chills, a bit of action, or even a deck builder, this list has something for fans of all kinds of horror, including those who don't like a jump scare at all. We take a bit of a broad view, but in general, if a game scares us, then it counts as horror, and could turn up on this list. Best of all the games on this list are available to buy and play right now, so you don't have to buy something at inflated rarity prices from an online bidding platform or anything like that. Anyway, enough preamble, these are the 12 best horror games to play on PC right now. Inscryption is a deck-building game where you battle against a scary, shadowy figure with glowing eyes. The cards have animals on, with different attack types and ranges. Some cards need others to be sacrificed before you can play them. The field of battle might grow obstacles that block your attacks. It's difficult. You can win by pulling your teeth out. Don't think about that knife on the table. Why is the stoat card talking to you? Should you listen to it? Is it trying to trick you? Inscryption is a puzzle game where you get up from the card table and walk around a strange cabin, examining things on the walls, lockboxes, strange books, a clock. The door is locked. How do you leave? Can you leave? Inscryption is a meta-story where framing the deck-building card battle game is the story of a YouTuber who follows some clues and finds that game buried in the woods. He plays it, and odd things start happening. Inscryption is a lot of things, and you won't expect any of them. The fun really starts when you finally get out of that cabin. Resident Evil Village, sort of Resi 8 in number, if not name, follows on from protagonist Ethan's antics with the infinitely horrible Baker family in Resi 7. A year on, and Ethan finds himself up against the Denzians of the titular village, which is full of werewolves, yes, but conveniently also has some big baddies each in their own grim house. It depends what kind of horror you want, of course. But while the favourite child Resi 4 does have some inspired creepy sections, especially those damn regenerators, this latest entry has one of the most frightening creatures ever to grace the series. That monster is separate, too, from Lady Dimitrescu, who became a pop culture phenomenon, owing mostly to being very tall, among other things, in a way very few characters in any medium manage. Although, like most Resident Evil games, it does basically become an action shooter for the final third of its runtime, Village really does have some of the best level and enemy design you'll meet in a Resi game. The excavation of Hobbs Barrow is suffused with an intense feeling of doom. Main character Thomasina Bateman, a Victorian barrow digger, narrates the game from the future, so you know she survives, yet you're also quite sure she's not alright, and that something terrible happened to her during her quest to excavate the titular barrow. The Thomasina of the past is warned off by many of the dour locals of Beaulieu, an isolated moorland town near Bakewell. The player is even warned off by Thomasina's narration, but the only way out of this gloomy, lovely folk horror adventure is to go through. The characters are brought to wonderful, bizarre life by a full voice cast, and the puzzles run to the weird and mythologic as well as the practical, in a way that matches the progress of the game very well. What you'll remember most about the excavation of Hobbs Barrow is the pixel art. A traditional medium for point-and-click games, here it's stretched to its limit. The small details around the town contrast with the wide shots of the moor, and every scene is full of movement. Most striking are the extreme close-ups, giving unsettling mobility to the face of a man about to be sick, a cat glaring at you from the foot of the bed, or a strange, slack-jawed creature with dark eyes and peg-like teeth. It'll stick with you, as will Thomasina's eventual fate. We sincerely hope folk horror continues its comeback. Condemned is a game about the hunt for a serial killer that very swiftly becomes a game about beating people to death with a plank. Whether we're supposed to laugh at how rapidly the investigator becomes a murderer, knee-deep in the corpses of unfortunates, isn't entirely clear. The entire game is pitched oh so seriously, never seeming to acknowledge the campy potential of its ludicrous "everyone is now an angry murderer" plot. There's something about dead birds and shards of metal, but Condemned is best enjoyed as the best horror melee game in existence. Whatever else it might be, it is certainly that. Is there a dingier setting in gaming? Condemned City is like a metaphor for the societal pressures that grind the underclass into the gutter, except it's not really a metaphor at all. It's an entire game in which people are physically ground into the dirt and the gutter. No one seems to enjoy fighting nor killing, the primary antagonist aside, but almost everyone you meet is compelled to grab the nearest blunt object and pummel your skull until your brains fall out of your nose. The atmosphere is relentlessly oppressive, so much so that some people are likely to switch off, numbed by the unchanging grime long before the end. For those who can tolerate the single note that plays throughout though, Condemned is a rare thing. A horror game in which the combat emphasizes the terror rather than diminishing it. Boasting some of the best lighting in a top-down 2D game you're ever likely to see, Darkwood makes the shadowy corners of a room or the spaces between trees absolutely terrifying. Things skitter into view, go bump in the night, and then latch onto your face or leg and chew right down to the bone. Don't be fooled by the gameplay you're currently watching. This is not a crafting survival game with horror elements. It's a narrative game and a surreal nightmare that borrows from RPGs, roguelikes, and survival games, but feels distinct from any particular genre. Really, deep down, this is a pure horror game, with all of its design focused on unnerving and startling its players. It also belongs to that rare group of games that might make you recoil from the screen, but also has enough quiet dread to creep back into your mind late at night when you're far away from your computer in a far more insidious fashion. The house abandon alone might have been enough for developers No Code to earn a place on this list. Originally released for free, it's a superb spin on parser-based interactive fiction, putting the player in the shoes of somebody playing a game which is maybe about somebody playing the same game. It plays with perception, expectation, and interaction in ways that made us smile as much as they made us shudder. It's scary, but it's also delightfully clever. But there's much more than the house abandon here. One of No Code's founders, John McKellen, previously worked on Alien Isolation, and some of that game's DNA has carried across with him. It's the love of old-fashioned interfaces that make up so much of Alien's retro future that you'll see in the other tales that make up Stories Untold. Each has its own mode of interaction and loosely fits into its own subgenre of horror. Consistently surprising, genuinely unnerving, and wholly unique, this marks No Code out as one of the most exciting young studios in the world. Has a game ever recreated the look and feel of a film as accurately as Alien Isolation? If so, we haven't played it. Creative Assembly's FPS horror masterpiece isn't just a generous portion of stealth and scares, it's a superbly detailed trip into the world that Ridley Scott and his team brought to the screen 3.5 decades ago. Everything from the creature itself to the individual posters and pieces of machinery that fill the Sevastopol has been crafted to fit with the design principles that made the Nostromo such a fascinating and enduring location. This is a vision of a future populated by ordinary people, working Joes, you could call them, who just so happen to make their living as part of the crew of gargantuan spacefaring vessels and stations. Within that world, Isolation is a story about a horrific alien that seems to be made of knives, acid, and a phallus, tearing through the population of a science fiction facility. It is also the story of a woman who has lost her mother searching for answers. And then again, it's the story of a corporation in decline, of power players and the victims of financial competition. That it manages to tell all of those intertwined tales while also delivering one of the most tense and terrifying system-driven games ever made is a remarkable achievement. Isolation is an unforgiving game. Unfair, even. The alien will kill you again and again and again. That's the nature of the beast, though. Right? And would the game feel like an authentic alien experience if every encounter didn't come with the risk of a swift demise? SOMA was the difficult second album for Frictional after the hype of Amnesia, and it turned out to be another enduringly fabulous horror game. Though it's also a sci-fi game, using futuristic tech and an AI with a very rigid interpretation of what it might mean for humanity to survive, to explore the idea of self, the conclusions it comes to, and the ideas that it makes you examine are frightening. They are enduringly scary. They are scary in a way that will keep you up at night for weeks after you play it. Stuck in an undersea science facility, decades after everyone you knew and loved has already died, you find it haunted by fusions of man and machine that are as sorrowful as they are frightening. They whisper snatches of half-remembered thoughts to themselves, or else are unaware that they're a human mind trapped in an automaton. They see their metal hands as flesh and blood. And in this context, the walls seem alive too. They seep water and black goo. The metal doors and hallways feel like they're watching you. After all, haven't you seen metal screaming? And most horrifying of all is the gradual revelation of what has become of humanity, both the species as a whole and yourself. The less said the better when it comes to Kitty Horror Show's masterpiece, which uses elements of found footage and lo-fi visuals to create the only piece of horror fiction that has ever made us want to leave our own home and sleep in a hotel for the night. It's short, though it has only just begun after the first playthrough, and we challenge anyone to play it in the dark, wearing headphones, alone. There are no sudden frights, but if you're amenable to its particular sense of dread, Anatomy will actually steal sleep from you. Pathologic is unique. It almost seems reductive to describe it as a horror game, but if not horror, then what? Set in a diseased town whose districts and major buildings are named after parts of a human body or biological functions and extractions, Pathologic doesn't place the player character at the centre of things. You can move toward the centre of things in an attempt to keep yourself alive or to discover the city's secrets, but the game never panders to you. The story of the city's death takes place over 12 days and can be experienced from 3 different perspectives. Brilliantly constructed, the setting and story are among the most literate and intelligent in gaming. In that they can be experienced piecemeal is testament to Icepick Lodge's ability to exercise the unique qualities of the medium. It's not an exaggeration to say that Pathologic advanced interactive storytelling in ways that few games ever have. Or at least, it would have done if anyone had been paying attention, or had been able to emulate its finer qualities. System Shock 2 is one of the best games ever made, whatever the chosen category might be. Few games, whether set in the depths of dungeons or the depths of space, have captured the claustrophobia that comes from existing in a space surrounded and infiltrated by death. You're never allowed to forget that a skin of metal separates you from extinction, and that the interior spaces that the universe is pressing against from the outside are filled with corrupted and corrupting organisms. That sense of dread and doom makes Irrational's masterpiece one of the greatest horror games, and, as a sci-fi horror RPG, it is unique. Shock 2 is a first-person survival horror game, but it's the use of RPG mechanics such as inventory management and character development that allow it to retain its power on repeated visits. There is no other RPG so tightly designed, so terrifying, and yet so open to experimental play. The cyborg midwives, as their name suggests, are the most horrifying creatures in any game. Even monkeys have become agents of fear within the coffin ships of Shock 2. Oh, and there are spiders. Of course there are spiders. It's the freedom that you're given to approach those enemies that makes them truly terrifying though. That the game gives you so much agency, allows you to feel like the agent of your own destruction, and that you are never railroaded makes it easier to believe that the things that lurk in the dark have as much freedom as you do. Let's be clear, Call of Pripyat could sit at the top of many lists, but this is as much its rightful home as any other. The S.T.A.L.K.E.R games are often spoken of as immersive simulations, and as first-person games that transcend the shooter bracket. The S.T.A.L.K.E.R games are about exploration, encouraging you to dig deeper until, like the Dwarves of Moria, you unleash terrible things. And those terrible things are far more terrible than the inhabitants of a haunted house or a derelict spaceship. Everything flows naturally from the world. If you need something, you find it within its place, and if you are required to do something, then you consider, observe, and approach. This is a world that is dying, and yet in which you can live, for a few hours at a time, building relationships not only with the people, but with specific places and features. It is a real place-made fiction, as much by the historical events that shape the game's mythology, as by the games themselves. At their most harrowing, the creatures of Pripyat are the final barrier that stands between you and an understanding of the world. There are anomalies that fuse bone and boil blood, and those can be accepted and circumvented with a little ingenuity. ingenuity. There are blistered buildings and the skeletons of a society, and those too can be accommodated into our understanding with a shudder and a sidelong glance. But the things that lurk in the darkest, most claustrophobic corridors and tunnels of the zone do not allow the mind to linger upon them. They are horrors in the truest sense, entities that behave in a repugnant fashion, and that are simply unacceptable. They should not exist and cannot exist, but once they have been encountered, they will always be there, just beneath the surface, just behind the walls. Thank you so much for watching. Do you agree with our list? Let us know your favourite PC horror picks in the comments below. For all your PC gaming needs, make sure to check out rockpapershotgun.com, and I'll be back very soon with more daft videos about PC games. Bye bye!